in March 31st, we had a board meeting for the Indiana State Poultry Association. And with what was happening in Minnesota about that time, we decided it'd be a good time to have an AI meeting as well, or an MPIP meeting. And between March 31st of last year and mid-January, when AI struck for Indiana again, we had, between BOA, the Board of Animal Health, and the Indiana State Poultry Association, we worked together on all these things, we had 26 statewide poultry avian influenza meetings. And I think that was a very important part of how we move forward. These are a list of several of those different meetings we had, and that yellow one there was the when the diagnosis took place of our own AI, but we had meetings. Wait a minute, what was that one? Yeah, that was in the small flock, and then we had all these other meetings, and then these are the meetings. This is where we had our diagnosis this year. So quite a few meetings, and then we put our planning on hold and started acting on it. So throughout the meetings, throughout the summer and fall, we had Indiana Board of Animal Health leading meetings with state agencies, among all the state agencies that we might be using should we have an AI outbreak. We worked a lot with IDEM. IDEM was fantastic. Our Indiana Department of Environmental Management was fantastic in getting landfills lined up so that we could take our products, our materials there if necessary. And we had our Indiana Department of Natural Resources doing some testing of Canadian geese and so forth. We had BOA representatives meeting individually. See, now, the Indiana State Poultry Association started in 1999 collecting premise data and getting all this together. But after 2015, 4 years we've been working with the Board of Animal Health, and in putting them, we would put that data into USA herds, Indiana herds. And it was our data, but we cooperated with the Board of Animal Health on that. And when we saw 2015 and what happened there, we kind of ratcheted up our efforts and handed that responsibility to BOA. They have more staff and so forth. And really got all the federal IDs lined up and made sure we had the 9/11 addresses and got that done. So we have kind of a history of working that out, and I think that's really important for the industry to pursue that and cooperate in that regard. Now, as I mentioned, we turned that over really just in the fall of 15. And Board of Animal Health also had developed permitting process, electronic signatures and the whole 9 yards. So they were going through company by company with us when we could schedule it, and meeting with and going over all of this, making sure all the premises lined up with the producer's expectations, and explaining the permitting and how the federal ID numbers all fit in and the 9/11 addresses and so forth. We also set up, worked with them so they could set up barcodes for each of their premises, so when they drop lab samples off, that could all be coordinated and go, make everything smoother, everything to make it smoother. So Wednesday, January 6th, part of our routine NPIP pre-movement surveillance. Negative. Sounds good. Life's good. Everything's going the way it should. January 14th. Sometimes, even in an emergency, things are going well. As I had mentioned, the Board of Animal Health was meeting with individual companies. They happened to be meeting with the company that was in charge of the index flock, the high-path AI, the same day we found out about it. I happened to be meeting with our Veterinary Services office in Indiana, kind of updating them on what we're doing and what we've been up to. And as I was addressing the VS office, I got this nasty buzz on my phone, and I looked, and it was the producer, same one that the BOA folks were at. And I ignored it because I was addressing a group, and I'll call them back later. except they called right back again for some unknown reason. So I thought, hey, excuse me a minute, I'll just take this phone call. And I did, and it wasn't happy news. And so I actually was able to get everybody lined up. Our BOA folks, I'm not sure they had quite arrived yet. I was at VS, told the state vet, and got everything moving. But, you know, sometimes there are things that work out right. So having 4 BOA folks on site right that morning was a great fortune. So, as I mentioned, that's you know, we were at the site and when all that took place, and the index site was 4 grow-out houses, each about 5,100 birds, 135 days old. And only one of the buildings had any signs. But in addition to that grow-out facility, there was an index premise included 18,000 45-day-old toms, and that was the son, and the father had an operation fairly close. So only the grow-out barn, the one of the 4, only one of them had any symptoms, on January 10th, they had noticed, started a reduction in water consumption. January 13th, mortality in the house jumped to 100 in that house. And then on January 14th, when I got the call, the mortality was 500. But by the end of the day, that was 800. So, you know, classic signs, not a good sign amongst them. And as I mentioned, another mile away, we had another 22,000 25-day-old toms. So immediately we got our 10-kilometer zone lined up. In that zone, we had 50 turkey facilities, 10 egg-laying facilities, an offline egg-breaking plant, and 2 feed mills, one for layers and one for one of the turkeys, or for the turkey company at that time. And sample collection and testing in all the barns was initiated immediately. We got everything tested on day -1 because it hasn't been officially diagnosed yet. The egg company actually tested for all flocks in or near the zone every day so they could continue to move product, and that's a lot of testing. Here's what an infected site looked like after we set up the incident command down there. Guys in hazmat suits and, you know, the whole truck wash pad there and everything else. It's a very hilly area down in southern Indiana. So January 14th, we got swabs from the barn taken by NPIP authorized agents and confirmed weak positive on AI for AI on an ACIA test at our Hickey laboratory that's part of Purdue. And then the swabs were from the affected barn were then taken to Purdue University and West Lafayette, the Nahum's lab, and also to Ames for the NBSL. Samples from the barns were presumptive positive at the Purdue lab. By the January 15th, we got confirmation from NBSL, so day 0. Infected premise was quarantined. Premises were identified in a 3 and 10 kilometer distance from infected farm. And the 3 commercial company premises within the control zone began sampling. The 3 companies began sampling and submitting samples from the control area. This was our incident command. I'll tell you what, this was really nice incident command building. It's only a couple of years old, not fully filled out yet. It's part of a university there, a local campus, right in the middle of things. It was very, very nice facility. And then not too far away was the fairgrounds, the county fairgrounds, and that was our staging site. There's one of our unified command meetings. This is the staging area. I had frightened them with my camera, I think. They all raced out that day. But no, it was actually, by this time I took this picture, was kind of less activity on that in that arena. We were kind of tearing that down. So of the samples collected in the premises in the 10K zone, we ended up with 8 additional flocks that were positive for the H7N8, but they were low path. No symptoms, just found them through the testing only. One of them could not be confirmed, and virus isolation the samples were negative, but it was just handled like another one of the flocks. Now, to give an idea of the parameters here, this is actually, you probably recognize the Marriott up here. This is a 7-mile strip, 1.4 miles wide. This is the Kansas Sioux. I don't know how familiar you are with it, but I spent more time looking at a map trying to figure out how to do this. But this gives you an idea of the dimensions where all these farms were found. Just very much a north and south strip in southern Indiana. And this next slide just gives you some idea. There's Topeka, Kansas City, and there's that little narrow strip. Give you an idea of size. So the sequencing, the LPAI was detected in these additional flocks. As potential risk has remained the same, even though it was a low path, and so because of its potential to mutate. So actions were all taken as though this is a high path. The next, the index case was determined to be of North American wild bird lineage, and was very similar to other wild bird viruses from the Midwest and Western states in the last few years. Getting a little beyond my level here of expertise, but 6 of the 8 gene segments were close to what was found in Kentucky in the low path AI just a few months before. And this is the first instance of a high path H7N8 in any species. Lucky Indiana. So talking to Dr. Suarez recently, these are a few some data they've determined about this virus. The virus we had in Indiana has an incubation of 2 to 3 days versus the Minnesota virus, which was 5 to 7 days. Of course, it's H5N2 versus H7N8. But, the infectious dose was 10 to the 4th versus 10 to the 6th for the Minnesota. And it was found to be the H7N8 was much more infectious than the H5N2 in turkeys, a little more so in chickens. Not as the H5N2 is not as infectious as the H7N8 in either species. So the depopulation of all the poultry in the infected flock was completed by January 15th, so a day after the original diagnosis by NBSL, or the final. The 10 barns containing another total of 62,000 birds were depopulated at the index premise and additional dangerous contact. It was a father-son operation, so the father's was a dangerous contact. Here's a couple of the 21 foamers that came down from USDA Veterinary Services. Oddly enough, the index flock, the company with the index flock, had just taken possession of their only foamer on Christmas Eve. And then Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. So in any event, this is one of the 22 foamers that were brought to the site. January 16th, again the day after we got the diagnosis, door-to-door sampling and surveillance was initiated. The first round of tests was completed in 6 days. We had 38 2-by-2 mile grids, and they just systematically went through each of those, and we found 105 small flocks. They were quarantined and tested negative 2 times. 14 days later, went through the same process. Only we didn't go to all 1,945 houses to find them the second time. DNR also did hunter harvest sampling and migratory waterfowl environment sampling. A dangerous contact layer flock of 156,000 hens was tested negative for AI, but this facility was fantastic because to get to the turkeys to depopulate them, you had to go in the same driveway and right along the hen house. And so it was determined that was just too risky, and so those two were depopulated, and they were landfilled. They were done in a day. January 20th, by January 20th, all the positive flocks, 258,000 turkeys, were depopulated and being composted in-house. This just shows a little bit about the check-in. This on the left side here is the where you drove into the staging area to check in and so forth. They would check your ID, check your card, your vehicle. This is my vehicle had a barcode on it, and that's how everything was monitored. A group from Arkansas did that. People converge in your state all over the place. They just converge. We had people from Puerto Rico and everywhere else coming for this. The hotels were happy. Restaurants. On January 16th, BOA established the surveillance zone extending another 10 kilometers beyond. You know, with the finding of those 10 flocks that first day, we didn't want to muck around. The industry didn't want to muck around. Just went out another 10 kilometers. In fact, the industry took that a step further. Beyond that 10K zone, beyond the second 10K zone, they went ahead in any areas of concentrated production. They also tested as though it was in the surveillance or control zone. Each premise was sampled and AI tested according to the USDA surveillance guidance. Originating premises were all AI tested within 24 hours prior to any movement of market-age turkeys or table eggs. As I mentioned, the egg company, every day, every facility tested. And that's quite a deal because the facility, the laboratory is about 3.5 hours away. So, okay. Again, 20-kilometer zone, same kind of work. We're just constantly surveilling or spreading it out. And then IDNR, our Department of Natural Resources, conducted opportunistic sampling of wild birds throughout that 20K zone. Compost was camped for all premises as of February 1st. The final flock plan was signed on February 3rd. I might note, real credit to Veterinary Services, all of these flocks, the indemnity for the flock, not for disposal or clean and disinfection, but for the flock itself, they were all paid within 24 days. Everybody was paid by 24 days from the diagnosis. So they really ratcheted that up and smoothed that process up. I think the industry records and working with the producers also smoothed that quite a bit. And then the Blue team transferred command to the Unified Indiana team on February 17th, so it's a little over a month. So the 6 rounds of AI tests were completed for all commercial flocks within the control zone. Payments, as I said, were made within 24 days of diagnosis. Control zone was lifted on Monday, February 22nd. OIE AI free date is Monday, May 2nd. The 11 of the 12 premises have completed their cleaning and disinfection. Environmental sampling activities are ongoing. 10 of the 12 premises have been negative environmental samples results returned. BOA has released quarantine orders on 4 of the 12 infected premises and dangerous contact premises. and 4 of the 12 premises have been granted restock approval. One thing I noticed in working in the Incident Command Center is the importance of caffeine in these events, and I'm not sure how clear it is from there, but these people were happy to get their dosage. We were thinking of getting intravenous drip. It's some long hours. Control zone, we had 65 poultry premises, 1 egg breaking plant, 2 feed mills, 105 small domestic flocks, 414,000 birds were depopulated, which I would call really affected. 1,945 residents visited. In the surveillance zone, the next 10K, we had an additional 60 poultry premises, and for a total of 233 premises altogether. The control zone lifted on Monday, February 22nd, 38 days after the initial diagnosis, 21 days following the last compost set. About 4,500 AI PCR tests completed. Samples delivered daily to ADDL by our state police or drivers. And I might note a lot of the depop was done by our Department of Corrections prisoners. And that was a fantastic benefit. That's part of the training. We did training for those prisoners. We were really thinking we might need it for the egg layers, but they were pretty damn good in the turkeys too. And but having a group of, up to 300 people available for that purpose, and by the way, they come in on time and they leave on time in buses, and but it was very helpful, very helpful. Since this, the industry has created a scholarship fund for the prisoners or their children. And we worked that with through our state government, the lieutenant governor and the treasury. And so we put aside, I don't know how much right now it is, but it's in excess of $40,000. And now the prisoners don't see the money, but they can apply for up to 2 people, children or nephew or whoever that might work for. And the state will then make a payment to the school, and so it's really pretty clean, and I'm very proud of the industry for stepping up to the plate for that. Let's see here. We had 9 confirmed H7N8 flocks, each on a hilltop. There were 6 field technicians responsible for 1 or more flocks prior to the infection. Only 1 field technician per flock. The 6 field techs with AI positive flocks were also responsible for several AI negative flocks. There are 3 feed mills providing feed to these 9 flocks. 1 feed mill per flock. 3 truck washes, each at the feed mills, used prior to each feed delivery. Now, I mentioned some of these things in part because, well, we just heard that this was because of biosecurity issues and tracking and so forth. And, I'm not saying that's not a part of it, but when you look at 6 different field technicians going to 9 flocks, it doesn't sound like they're tracking it from one to the other. And with the truck washes and the 3 different feed mills that are providing this feed for these 3, and each of these providing the feed for these 9 flocks, and you look at the 9 flocks, they're getting feed from just one of those feed mills. It's not like they're mixing and matching. So I think there's more going on here. And when you look at that map, and they're all straight line, north and south, and all happen to be on hilltops. I didn't show elevation, but they're all on hilltops. I don't know the answers, but I tend to stay away from the answer that you hear every time. It's just biosecurity, and people are tracking it all over. Because we're not going to get away from feed trucks, because I think they're a real important part of the business. And you're not going to get away from field staff. And you know what? they can't afford to pave all these driveways that are a zillion miles long up these hills. So I think there's going to be gravel for a while. So I think we need to focus on maybe some other things. So we've done environmental samples on 11,350 surfaces. We're all becoming real surface pros down there. 516 people were at the incident command post at the peak. There are people, you go down there and it's like, what are all these people doing? There's just a lot of people at these places. One of the things that I was surprised to learn in these incidents is that all the federal officials are actually in the incident command post. The people out in the field are contractors and other people, and of course our BOA staff and the producers and so forth. But it was a little different than I thought it would be in that regard. We had 738 permitted movements during that time frame, 414,000 birds depopulated. Low-risk prisoners, again, very, very important. Commercial producers completed 6 rounds of testing in the control zone for each flock. One of the things we did differently that I think worked out fairly well is we kind of inverted our focus. Instead of focusing on that positive flock, if you have a positive flock, they're going to die. That's the end of it. And we focused on all the other flocks so that they could move and get permitted to move product and move however they needed to. So that was a shift in focus that we did in Indiana. Plan on utilizing multiple redundant depopulation methods. Okay, I'll just tell you, foaming at 0 is not real easy. And in the end, we used TEDs, we used KEDs, we used everything we could think of to get rid of these birds. And that was legal and above ground, of course. And we did rapidly, but it's a challenge. And I think everybody's been kind of planning on foaming, maybe, but I think it'll be like our 3rd of 6 redundant depop methods. And ironically, our prisoners were also working on some manifolds for CO2. Almost got them done in time, but not quite. Not quite. Let's see. I already covered the cold. Okay. One of the things they learned from 2015 is you need stable, consistent case managers. Not that the case managers are unstable. Don't get me wrong. But you need them to be there for the duration. We also need the same thing for subject matter experts. You don't need your composting expert. One facility had 7 different composting experts. By the way, there's not consensus on this stuff. So it's one guy tells them to do this, one guy tells them to do that, and it's frustrating. So just be consistent. What worked well? Oh, the community spirit. We had a lot of veterinary services people down there commenting on it. I was with Dr. Marsh, our state veterinarian, who's done a great job of leading us through this. And in Indiana, the state veterinarian is responsible for these kind of things, but we worked with a lot of state agencies. But one time he and I were heading down to southern Indiana from Indianapolis, and he was listening to voicemail over my speakerphone, over my car radio speakers, just so we could hear things better. And it's convenient. And he had a call back from the surveillance group had left signs if people weren't at the home when they were looking for backyard flocks. And so one of the families, the lady of the house, called back because they had arrived on a Sunday and they weren't there. They were at church. They came back and they called Dr. Marsh up as requested, left a message and said, we don't have any backyard flocks. Of course, we know a lot of people that are in the poultry business, and we really appreciate your due diligence and that you're following through on this stuff. And it was kind of heartwarming to hear that here's people that are being inconvenienced by all this, and they're really appreciative of even though they don't have a dog in the hunt, they're appreciative of the work that was being done, and that happened often. So the community spirit down there was fantastic. We had strong leadership, planning from the industry. They made difficult decisions fast. And when I addressed this with them and congratulated them on that, the comment that I got back was, we made those decisions when we wrote the plan. We just followed the plan. That was the easy part because we'd already made the tough decisions, and they were. Local leadership, I don't know if this is that way with all states, but we have 10 districts in our state. They match up with our Board of Animal Health districts, and they have veterinarians in there. But the Homeland Security has 10 district groups. So we had groups from 3 of the different parts of the state, 3 of the different districts, came down and helped man the incident command posts for this emergency. So we had our state folks there as well as the federal folks, as well as BOA. We had Dubois County Emergency Management, Dubois County Fairgrounds, Public Health Department, Farm Services Agency of the county. They were very, very helpful. A lot of the producers have their what's the number you need? SAM's number and your DUNS number. A lot of them, they might have programs through the FSA office, but those who didn't, the FSA office was very helpful to help producers that are not that familiar with getting those kind of numbers and getting that kind of verification. They were very helpful in that. And of course, Vincennes University, they gave us their building. It was very helpful. These are some of those Homeland Security teams. State leadership, of course, the Board of Animal Health is our lead agency for this. The way the state of Indiana is set up, Homeland Security is in charge of any emergency in general. And then if there's a special, if this is, in this case, a animal health disease, then the Board of Animal Health, they're in charge. They take control. But the whole structure is the same either way for the incident command and all that. So the Board of Animal Health and the Department of Homeland Security were very integrated in this. We had Purdue University did a fantastic job of getting these samples routinely every day. Department of Homeland Security, as I just mentioned, Department of Corrections with the prisoners, an enormous boost. Indiana State Police. The state police delivered those samples by airplane, by car, whatever it took, and they can speed. The supporting agencies continue here. Department of Transportation, we got waivers so we could get carbon sources brought in, and that was a lot of carbon it took to do this. In that frozen weather, when we were using foaming, we drowned a lot of, we didn't drown the birds, but we had a lot of water, just lots of water. So that just means you need more stuff to absorb all this. Another reason to be careful about your use of foam. We work closely with the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, and they were extraordinary in getting landfills to agree to take material. So far, we haven't had to use that except for the low path, and that's a whole different ballgame. But we've got agreement from, I forget how many acres, just acres and acres, this throughout the state. A lot of good support from the landfills and IDEM on that. Department of Natural Resources did a lot of testing for us. Wildlife. Department of Health was involved. Department of Agriculture. And I'd like to think we had a little part in it with our Poultry Association and the NPIP. It's worked out pretty well there. These are all the state agencies that were involved that I just mentioned. And really, that, I think, was key. The fact that you see all these agencies were involved was a big part of what made this work, because none of us could do it alone. And our Board of Animal Health, it's not just volumes of people. There's good people there, but there's not a lot. So all of us contributing were very helpful. The governor was down at the incident command early on in the process, and and he was very engaged in giving us resources and making sure everything went smoothly. Our federal friends, Wildlife Services, had nothing but appreciation for those folks. They're actually closer to my office than the lab is. So anyway, we've got FSA, as I mentioned, was very helpful. They offered to be the command post if we needed it, but we went with the other facility. Obviously, Veterinary Services and NRCS was helpful in some of our environmental and disposal questions. Active engagement of all producers in all decisions was one of the things that worked really well. I think it's really important. And then planning and meetings, more meetings, and then repeating that. I can't emphasize enough how valuable that was. So coordination amongst all the state agencies, coordination with the federal government, coordination with the industry, and planning. That's what's some of the most important stuff. And in case you're wondering why I called this whole thing, this is a slide that was taken right in the heat of things, although it doesn't look like it because it's snowing. But this was a church in that very area. Crystal, Indiana is really close to the heart of where things were going on, and they were calling for prayer for the poultry in the area. So